Thank you to all our transcript volunteers. You're doing a great job helping us make sure the transcripts are published together with the podcast. If you'd also like to help out with the podcast, just email us at hey@uxpodcast.com. That's H-A-Y or H-E-J. You choose.
UX Podcast Episode 256.
Hello everybody, welcome to UX Podcast. Coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden, we are your hosts James Royal Lawson
and Per Axbom.
Balancing business, technology, people and society. With listeners in 197 countries and territories in the world, from the United States of America to Vietnam.
And today we have something exciting. It's a link show. And I feel actually really excited today because I feel like these are the shows that we don't do very often, but we get to geek out about something very specific. A topic that you choose one topic, I choose one topic, or one article each, and we just dive into it and see what happens.
Do you mean we don't script these?
We should.
Do we ever? But the two articles we've got for you today, one of them is about public touchscreens in the COVID era.
They need a rethink is the subtitle of that one. It's by Mario Noble. He's a UX designer in Los Angeles, California.
And the second one up is newsletters.
Or an enormous rant about writing on the web that doesn't really go anywhere, and that's okay with me.
By Robin Rendell. He's a designer at Century. He works and lives in San Francisco. Apparently he's from Southwest England.
Yeah, I found that in his About page.
I threw you off there, Per, didn't I? By the way, I kind of split up the task of reading out the titles of the article.
I love that it's not scripted because then because I'm not looking at you either right now. I'm just looking at our two articles and I didn't realize, what are we doing?
Oh, yeah. And everyone's out there listening thinking, get on with it.
So this one that you chose, it was dirty. The first thing I thought of when I just reading the title of it, the public touchscreens in the COVID era, you think of how dirty you've seen over the years. You've seen sort of pictures of keyboards and how dirty they become. And when you zoom in with a microscope, of course, on touchscreens, you've seen that as well. You know that people use their mobile phones when they're on the toilet, and it's just. It feels really filthy and it's disgusting. And it's just sharing all those germs with other people on all these touchscreens. Maybe want to buy gloves, but I need to buy gloves that work with the touchscreens. And it's like, oh my God, I need to read this article. That was actually my first thinking, just reading the title.
So the title really triggered the germaphobe in you.
Yes.
Yeah. No, yeah, this is about, what should we do about public touchscreens in the COVID era? And, okay, it's something that, well, all of us have become a lot more aware about sanitization and hygiene during this pandemic. Now, the evidence isn't kind of, well, the science behind COVID and surfaces is a little bit mixed there. I mean, yes, it stays on surfaces and can survive, but it's maybe not viable. But the WHO does still recommend that you should, or WHO should, they still recommend you should be careful with surfaces. And that is to do with the fact that not all surfaces are the same. Some surfaces are much, much better at harbouring bacteria and viruses and disease and such. That can be viable. Other ones are not really made for the job. So things die pretty quick. They don't reproduce, they die off.
It also made me think, I mean, it's not just about COVID, because what we've seen, of course, during this past year is that there's a lot of other diseases and illnesses that also have plummeted when it comes to how prevalent they are. So really changing our behavior changes everything.
Yes, and that's exactly it, Per. That's for me was the what really got me interested in this, because it makes you really look back and assess our attitudes towards interfaces we touch. I mean, because we've been touching interfaces for, like you said about keyboards, we've used our hands to interact with computers pretty much since day one. In fact, pretty much certainly. I don't think we were doing it via any other means, apart from maybe because even feeding the ticker tape was using your hands to feed it in. But COVID really has put this into the forefront, and making us look at that and think about what we could do. So I want us to listen to this or think about this not just from a COVID aspect, but from a hygiene perspective in general. And well, just to give you some more context or information examples, I guess, about this. Like we've got personal touchscreens, like you said. We've all got devices. We've all got mobile phones these days, tablets, and so on. But those are personal. There are a very limited number of people using that device more often than not. I mean, it's rare that someone else touches my phone other than me.
Yeah.
So as far as kind of spreading germs, bacteria, and so on, that kind of reproduction rate, I suppose you could say, from germs on my telephone is probably reasonably limited. But
and you even feel uncertain about lending your phone to someone else because you're always afraid that they'll see something that they're not supposed to see.
Well, they're just really, really personal.
Yeah.
And I actually do wipe mine every morning. But that's more because I don't like all the greasy finger marks you can see.
When you said wipe, I thought you were joking that you were actually erasing the content on it.
Yeah. The tinfoil hat goes on and I just blow all my devices in the morning. No, well, I clean my glasses, I clean the phone and so on every morning. It's part of the routine. But then you've got everyday public touchscreen devices. So these are things like we've been used to for decades with like cash registers and cash dispensers, point of sale terminals, self-checkout at stores.
At airports,
check-ins at airports, or even hospitals and other medical facilities. That's quite often now you'll have to fill in your details on a touchscreen thing before, as far as checking in. Here in Sweden, we've got loads of queue mechanisms that are based on like pressing a screen or touching the right kind of thing to see which type of errand that you've come to the shop for, and so on. Parking payment systems and devices.
And if you're out on public transport, I mean, even the button to say you want to get off the bus.
Yeah, restaurants. There's restaurants now where Pinchos here in Sweden and in Europe as well. That the whole thing is built on, when the restaurants are open, ordering stuff on your own tablets or on tablets that are around. There's plenty of tablet-based ordering goes on in restaurants. When you come into restaurants, you can, at the beginning or lunch restaurants and so on, you maybe press your order on a screen. McDonald's, all those ones now are just touchscreen stuff when you go in.
How are we even alive?
Yeah. So that's just the touchscreen aspects. But you've got manual interfaces as well, as he brings up in the article. These are the ones like, and Don Norman's going to love us for this, non-automatic doors. You have handles on doors. You have to push doors. You touch surfaces to open and close doors. Railings, a UXer's favourite. Lifts and elevators. Yeah. The control panels in those. We've talked about that many times. They're a whole genre to themselves. You've got toilets, public toilets, which generally do have people doing some cleaning work there. So they're not kind of like without sanitizing aspects to public toilets, but there's a lot of things you touch in toilets.
And it's interesting about toilets because when you're in a restroom, you become more aware of the germs, even though they, of course, exist everywhere. I think more in that space, I pull up my sleeve to touch the door handle, or that's what I do sometimes at crosswalks as well. Because I've become more aware of it for some reason in certain spaces.
Yeah, and I also started thinking about that too. That we have levels of expectation of hygiene awareness or hygiene respect, I guess. And the article doesn't talk about this in particular, but I may think about it. That we have, you have health and safety standards when it comes to food handling and restaurants and food preparation. That if you work in those environments, there are very controlled. There are a lot of laws and rules and things, and you have to go through education processes to be certificate. To get a certificate that you've had the education to deal with food stuff in those kind of environments. Like you said about toilets, public toilets, we're all very aware ourselves when we go into these places that we know when they're not nice and clean. You see it straight away. You sense it when you go in. You can just see straight away that bits of paper on the floor. This one hasn't been cleaned recently. You kind of probably look up at that list that they have on the back of doors saying when someone signed last time they're supposed to clean it, and you're, oh god, that was yesterday. Oh no. So we've got a system in place there, recognition of hygiene levels and expectation of hygiene levels, and even understanding ourselves about what we should be doing, even though in many situations we maybe don't, at least didn't used to follow protocol as well as we should have done in some of these situations. But when it comes to user interfaces, there we haven't until recently, until the pandemic, had any real kind of, not as a population, I don't think, as a world population, I don't think we've had really expectations of how the hygiene aspect would be with some of these interfaces.
Exactly. So that's the new thing. It's that people will actually expect you to. So you can actually improve the user experience by giving the experience of something that is cleaner.
Yeah. Well, then, if you look at the article goes on to talk about the advantages of it, like, why did we have touchscreens in the first? Why have we gone to touchscreens? And he lists quite a lot of potential, or speculates a lot on the advantages that they are. And he comes to the conclusion that this list of advantages, I'm not going to go through them, but the point was here that he realised that these advantages are almost entirely advantages for the business side.
Yeah.
And that the advantages for the user, from the user perspective, it doesn't really shine through a huge amount on the list. In many cases, it's been, we need less people if we've got a screen instead of a person.
Right. Exactly.
It's not like we were screaming for some of these touch screen devices. It was more that organisations saved money by not having tellers at the bank. They could have a machine outside to dispense money. You don't need to kind of queue at a checkout to kind of pay for your groceries. You could actually do it yourself. All this stuff is giving advantages to the organisations, and indirectly maybe gives you cheaper prices.
Or there's a shorter queue maybe to those things than to the cash.
But the interface has been used to transfer work from someone else to you, effectively, in many of these situations, rather than being user-driven desire for change. So then we move on to, in the article, about things that affect screen usage. Now, during the pandemic, basically. He doesn't say that specifically, but he's inferring that it's during the pandemic, that you've got a perceived risk level when it comes to using an interface. Like the device in your household, maybe it's low risk because there's a very small number of people who are using it. If it's a certain group of staff that use a certain device all the time in a shop, then maybe that's also reasonably limited, because if you think about number of contacts, then the people using the device is very limited. It's the people that work in the store. Then you've got maybe a device in a bigger organisation, but you aren't sure about how it's kind of been sanitized or controlled. And then you've got the ultimate one, the public random space. Like, people can come up to an interface in the street, effectively, or in a public space and use it. We have no idea how many people, who's using it, or anything.
It's so interesting about trust, because you always think of the confined space that you find yourself in. So if it's only the staff in the store that are using it, you feel safer. But one of the people on staff, of course, could have just been in a really dirty place. You have no idea. But that doesn't really factor into your expectation.
No. And then the last bit of this I want to bring up, really, is he talks about the inclusion aspect. And here's something really interesting, and I don't think we'll have time to dig into it, fully. But we already know that touchscreens can be not hugely inclusive at times. But here we've got the situation about whether you've got you're reluctant to use a touchscreen because of the hygiene aspect. Yeah. But you might not have a choice, because the way that the organisation or the interface has been designed, there isn't an alternative to the touchscreen. Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, from an inclusive design point of view, and pandemics and hygiene in general. How do you cater for the people who need to use your interface, but really don't feel comfortable or maybe feel anxious about using a touch interface now?
Yeah,
that was very interesting to start thinking about.
Yeah, it feels like it's gonna just keep growing, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, if you skip to some of the kind of conclusions or further thoughts about this, is that he comes with some possible solutions, suggestions about how we'd avoid or move on from touchscreens, and comes to the conclusion that foot control was the best one. And I actually don't really agree, because I think that just opens up a whole another can of inclusive design problems, and how do you make that usable for everyone, and complex interfaces, because some of these ones we have in existence are quite complex, and having to use like stamping on stuff to control it is going to be real challenging. So I think touchscreens are actually here to stay, even though we've gone through a pandemic and we're getting worried about the hygiene aspect. But I think maybe we'll move into a realm where we're definitely going to expect more hygiene when it comes to interfaces, and maybe we'll see in Japan they've got the whole automated toilets kind of thing where they do all the hygiene themselves. Maybe there's ways of kind of something wiping across a screen to sanitize it between usage, and a camera would tell, just like in gents urinals, when you move away from the urinal, a lot of them flush automatically. And there's a lot of self-flushing, even toilets now, self-flushing toilets, because there's a sensor. So you can...
He did mention UV cleaning as well. I mean, screens are easier to UV clean. But that's something I thought about, that we have a lot of keyboards, but screens should be, at least, it feels like it should be easier to clean than keyboards are with the wipe mechanism, as you were saying.
And that goes us all the way back to the beginning when I said about how certain surfaces are better for kind of breeding germs than others.
Yeah.
And I read one example the other day about things like athlete's foot, for example. That thrives fantastically on surfaces, because it only needs a little bit of moisture and warmth, and it kind of keeps on growing. Whereas things like COVID on a hard surface like glass isn't going to last very long at all. But so there, when you think about the different types of surfaces, then our touch screens don't really fall into the kind of worst bracket of unhygienic things. But if you don't do any hygiene whatsoever, then potentially there could be stuff building up on that over time that isn't as nice, or if the frequency of use means that stuff is quickly transferred. So I definitely think we're going to move to thinking more about hygiene and screens. But I wanted to throw out the questions like, what can we do now to do with improving the I suppose hygiene of our touchscreen interfaces if they're not going away? And I started to think about maybe, well, okay, should we put reminders on screen about sanitizing the screen before use? Should we put reminders about sanitizing after use? If you're doing the self-sanitizing route, can we update our interfaces to reduce the number of touches? So you're actually touching the actual interface less, because we've designed, and we know that in a lot of interfaces, less touch, less clicks, if we can make an comparison with web as well, is a good thing in many situations. So maybe that's another aspect to think about. Can we reduce the amount of touching to improve hygiene?
People will have to change to way shorter email addresses to lessen the clicks when they enter their names.
Yeah. Flashcards that they can scan. You can hold up a flashcard with your email address and it scans it off.
I'm now seeing the screens and interfaces themselves as toilets, because you would actually have to have a flush button that you press after each use. You flush the screen and you actually clean it off.
Or wave your hand in front of the sensor and it would then wipe across. That's fascinating. This really did get me thinking about a lot of different aspects of industrial design, user interface design, inclusive design, understanding people's emotions and feelings when they're using interfaces. So I think it's a really good article to get you to trigger the whole grey matter and get you thinking about the wider world that we design in.
Yeah, loved it. So moving on to something completely different, we're going to talk about newsletters. Well, at least the article is named newsletters, but it is really an enormous rant, as we mentioned. And there are no real conclusions, I think, but it raises some important issues. And some things I think that you and I talk about from time to time over the years, how content lives on the web, how it's distributed, and how it's archived. And it really starts out as a love letter to newsletters.
Before you go into the details of that, I just want to give our listeners if they haven't looked at it yet, then it's really interesting how this article is presented.
Yeah,
because it's presented almost poetically.
It's beautiful
with short just small paragraphs or even just sentences, and a picture, a black and white old kind of sketch or whatever, presented at the same time as the text, and you move a screen at a time between, almost like a presentation of these poetic lines in the article.
Yeah, so it's impossible to read it fast, which it forces you to reflect on each sentence. I don't know if you've tried it on mobile. It's the same beautiful experience on mobile as well. So it's really well done, and it's actually something to remember when we go on and talk about the content and how it's distributed. Because something like this wouldn't fit into a newsletter, and I don't know really what it would fit into to be replicated.
Yeah, that's a little bit of the irony of this.
Yes.
Is that he's produced something which can't work as a newsletter.
Exactly, because it's a piece of art.
Yeah.
I think that perhaps is one of his points, because I mean he's expressing his love of newsletters, but is quickly goes on in this intro in the first part of actual 4 parts, but he goes on and part 1 starts later. He expresses his disappointment on this. How could this be the future? And really that when we do newsletters, it feels like we're going back to something old. Because it's
parchment. He was talking books.
Yes,
books.
exactly.
We're going back to parchment paper. Yeah,
it's somewhat antiquated, it says, and so and books are so much better than parchment in the same way that websites are so much better than email. Yes, exactly. And he tries to think of some reasons why this could be, that people are choosing to publish newsletters. I mean, it really has grown. I don't have any stats with me, but people are talking about Substack these days. Every other day, someone is starting a new newsletter. It's like back in the day when everybody was starting a podcast. Now everybody's starting a newsletter. So part of it is they're really, really easy to publish. Anyone can type text on a keyboard. Well, not anyone, but you know what I mean. So once you can do that and you have something to write, you go somewhere, you write a newsletter, you press publish, and you have some subscribers, and it distributes to all those subscribers, which means that it also notifies all the subscribers automatically because they get the email, and everybody knows how email works. And there's another aspect of it is, of course, writers can get paid via newsletters, perhaps more easily than you get paid via publishing on a blog, for example. And alternatively, he's also suggesting that websites are difficult to make, and they can't notify people when new things are published, and we'll get more to that. And they aren't able to pay writers as easily. And the difficult to make part is what frustrates him, because now we're in 2021 now, we're in a time when websites can be beautiful. And I think that's why he's made this post so beautiful, to exemplify this. But it's not for everyone. Everyone can't do this. So he's looking for a solution to this, and going after a world where we actually publish content on the web and provide the ability for people to subscribe to that content and for the content producers to get paid. And of course, anyone listening who is familiar with RSS is thinking RSS, because that is the solution, isn't it? That is how content on the web has been distributed for decades. And
how we use for podcasts. I mean,
exactly.
The whole world of podcasts is fundamentally built on RSS.
Exactly. So if you don't know what RSS is, you are using it because it's the way that the content is distributed through. That's how this episode came into your podcast player, is because there's a text file somewhere pointing to it. And that text file is called RSS.
Even if you're listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, because we feed them with our RSS, and then they reuse that. So it's all RSS for podcasts.
Exactly. And this is what we find so interesting, because it seems so obvious to those of us who understand and have used RSS for many years. Many people used to use FeedBurner as the way to access content on the web and read different stories from blogs, from news sites, because they all had RSS feeds. Many still do today, but the awareness of what RSS is and how you can use it to your advantage is not that widespread. And one of the things that Robin is suggesting, that we actually, if RSS was to be rebranded, then that could be a way forward. Because
I'm
RSS,
still angry at Google.
Yes, I am extremely angry at Google
still
for killing
angry
RSS.
Because they killed it off, and I'm cross still because they didn't just move it into Gmail. Because I think they could have moved RSS. It would have fit into Gmail, but they didn't do that. They just killed off their reader.
Yeah.
That's what we saw.
Yeah,
as
someone
the
even
start of the
suggested
death
on
of it.
Twitter to me when I shared this article that this was the perfect platform for starting a social media platform, because you had people who were really engaged in this tool, and you could have connected them with each other as well. And it's just so frustrating. I can feel his frustration because RSS is so extremely simple. It's standardized. It works. It's being used. But and for me, that is the UX problem. Why isn't it getting used by more people? What is making it so hard to use? Why are people not publishing blogs instead of newsletters? Because the problem, of course, with newsletters is that the content gets lost. It's not searchable on the web. You can't find it via a search engine. It won't go into archive.org as something that you can search up there. So it kind of gets lost as well, which to me is the sad part of this when people choose newsletter as their distribution way.
You're right. It is. It does. If you think about the effort it goes into producing content, then newsletters are quite tragic in that sense that you don't have a long shelf life for a newsletter.
Right. And exactly. And often when I find sometimes I start subscribing to a newsletter, and it turns out there's no archive of the earlier ones, which there of course would be if you had a blog post. But sometimes I realize people also switch platforms. So I tried this platform, and then I tried that platform. So all their content, even if it's saved on the company that supplies the solution for their newsletter distribution, even if it's saved there, they don't move the content from one to the other as they change platforms. So it keeps getting lost in different containers across the web, which are really hard to find.
Don't start me off on redirects, Per.
Sorry?
Don't start me off on redirects and how bad we are at
Yes, exactly. So essentially we're saying that the reason people use the antiquated technology is because it's easier to use. There's less friction. And we've failed completely at making it a frictionless experience or a more appealing experience to actually publish in a way that the content becomes more available and more future-proof as well.
I think also about the whole expectations thing ties in with the first article that we seem to have still got lower expectations of how a newsletter is designed or how it looks. I mean, I'm gonna, if the content's good, I'm gonna read it even if it's just plain text. Whereas our expectation for a website, if I was met by something as simple as the newsletter. I mean, okay, Medium got quite close in many ways. Some of these article sites are very slimmed back. But I think by and large our expectations are more kind of busy when it comes to design of content on websites compared to content on or via email.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And something that struck me as I was pondering upon newsletters and statistics, and I was looking at people who have started Substacks and they're saying, oh, I'm pressing send now, I'm sending to 200,000 subscribers. It's the same problem as we have when doing podcasts and doing podcast statistics, is that you send something out and you can maybe see how many open, and some people actually you can't see if they open because they've blocked if you see opening. And some people, of course, will just open the email and delete it, and a lot of people won't read it. So it's just impossible to know how many readers you have. You know how many subscribers you have. You have no idea how many actually read it and have actually created rules for sending your email or newsletter straight to the to the trash. So that aspect of it really intrigued me in looking at all these numbers that people throw out. I'm sending it to this and this many subscribers. What does that really say?
But I guess ultimately, I don't know if you want to move into the paying for content aspect, but that is kind of, I suppose, the more important metric for people who are producing content and well, for a living or to earn money from them. How many read it doesn't really matter. It's how many have paid you, I suppose, is more important.
Right, exactly. And sometimes you can probably make some conclusions around how many of my subscribers are willing to pay for the content. But the way that it works is that a lot of people just have people sign up for free at first to get as many subscribers as possible. So it's really hard to measure that, how that fraction of users, how many they will be in the end. And I can't say that I'm really an expert on the pay, how people pay for newsletters and how much they pay. It seems to me to be a whole new world, because I don't pay for newsletters. I haven't started yet, at least. I don't know if you do.
No, I don't either. But at the same time, the article talks about how paying and subscribing to a writer's work should be one click away. And we've had things like Patreon. And what was that service we had in Sweden where you could add a little kind of button on your website to click and make a micropayment?
Yes, exactly right. I remember
what was that called? Oh, anyway.
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing about how, you kind of want, as a writer, when you're writing something, you want to offer people the ability to reward you with just a click, like you would, click a like button or kind of a heart or whatever on something, that you do that and you would get a little bit of money. And the article talks about some of the systems that are developing to do that. I think Coil and Puma's a browser, I think. I don't really know much about them, but they're trying to build on a web monetization API. So as in you would have the mechanisms behind, a wallet would be connected, and if you clicked on something, it would allow a micropayment to someone for the content they've done. And that actually, I mean, that's one of those things I've always really hoped we could get to. Because there are many times when I've clicked like on something and I've thought, no, this actually is really good. And I'd be prepared to pay, a few cents, a few pence, or a few krona or whatever to reward writers for some of their work, because it's given me some value. But I maybe don't want to subscribe.
Right. Now I have to mention that actually Medium offers something like that as well. If you say that on Medium, you publish an article and you say, I want to get paid for this article, then actually the people who do pay for subscribing to Medium, as they like stuff, the amount of money is distributed across all these likes, or claps as they're called on Medium. So there are versions of that around, but there's nothing as of yet getting standardized. And it's still, people are not choosing to publish on the web, I think, because it appears too difficult.
Yeah. It is still not just writing words. You have to do a lot of other things too to get your stuff out there.
Yeah.
There's a quote here from him, and he says, I see the web as this public good that's been hijacked by companies trying to sell us mostly heartless junk. And that's I think me and you have both got that feeling about. In fact, Heather Burns, we both read an article, also another article that we aren't covering today, but she wrote an article about how basically how millennials haven't kind of like lived the dream that maybe us Generation Xers have done, where the web was still in its early days and we thought it would be this wonderful utopia where we could publish all content, it would all be free and everything was connected to everything, it'd be always all wonderful. And then the next generation growing up have been in this kind of Facebook closed world where everything is to do with kind of sucking advertising information from you and selling you stuff, and that free open web that we had in our vision in the beginning is already gone. So they're trying to fix, in Heather's article she's talking about how with privacy concerns now we're trying to fix the issues caused by the closed web rather than revigorate and reintroduce the dreams of the open web.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. I love that article. We need to link that in the show notes as well. And
this is connected. This is connected, completely connected to it, though, because death of RSS, the rise of paywalls, the growth of newsletters, the monetization of content. It's all this stuff is interconnected.
And I think that is exactly what Robin is feeling as well, because he's trying to end on the positive note. I mean, he's excited about this sudden popularity of newsletters because it shows how desperately people still want this kind of writing, and that is the kind of writing that we used to have back in the day. And so we value the web in that way, and we just need to, as he puts it, take the web back.
It's a revolution.
So, do we have any suggested listening after this, James?
We always do. Got two for you. First up, a reasonably recent episode 251, where we talked multimodal design with Cheryl Platts. It feels relevant now when we've talked about touchscreens and different ways of interaction with interfaces. That if you haven't already listened to episode 251, then do that, because that's a really interesting chat about the challenges, not just of voice, but other types of or multiple interfaces that you can deal with in your work.
And you've put another one in here, that episode 50, James and Per begin with words. That's a long time ago.
That's oh god, it's over 7 years ago now, Per. And that's where we talk about just words and simplicity of the importance of the content, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah, is that the one? This is a web page like that.
Yes,
rant
this is a
about
web
it.
page.
Okay, people remember that. Some of us.
But again, linked to the importance of just the words and content and how they are the things that we need to lift up.
So, if you can spare a little bit of your time, then join our little community of volunteers. We're always looking.
It's like a micropayment.
Oh yes.
If you don't want to give us some money, because we do allow people to contribute with some money, but that's just one form of kind of payment you can give us. The other one, of course, is you can donate a little bit of your time.
Yeah, and it's so appreciated.
And we're always looking for people to help with the transcripts and now even the publishing.
Remember
to
to
email us. Sorry, Per. I just wanted to email us. Say hello.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, did you know the first French fries were not actually cooked in France?
No, Per, I didn't know that the first French fries were not actually cooked in France.
Yeah, they were cooked in Greece.
Oh. Not only a bad joke, but a tongue twister.